And and I have been in education for over 15 years now in different capacities. At one point, I had my own business, working one on one with students and providing IEP and 504 consulting and support for those students. I am currently a classroom teacher and loving it. And I am very excited to be able to share some information with you all today. A little more about me personally. I live in Union County, and I have a 3.5-year-old that keeps me really busy. And I'm a big reader and lifelong learner, and doing lots of fun summer reading. And thank you for being here. And hopefully, I can help answer any questions that you have. And for everyone who's tuning in, you will be able to, contact me after the presentation. And we're recording, so you'll be able to re-listen and get this information at a later time or to refresh if you need to. Okay, so our schedule for today is that we took a little bit of time to do some introductions. I'll be speaking to you for approximately 30 minutes, and then after that time, we'll have time to go through any questions, or I can back up or clarify anything that you have questions about. Okay, so just some basics on the IEP and what that is. For those who are new to this journey, it is a whole lot of information all at one time. And as a parent, it's kind of can seem like a foreign language sometimes. There are a lot of acronyms, a lot of abbreviations, a lot of a lot of information out there to absorb. So this is going to be like the starting point. Okay. So I'm going to try to, break it down into some smaller steps for you, so that you feel empowered to ask more questions and help your child, because we all want to support our children's education in whatever way we can. And we all have different ways of seeking support and different comfort levels. And as a parent, you can kind of think like, well, what can I do? Like, we're working at home, we're working in this workbook, or I'm noticing this, and you may not be sure where to start. um, in case anyone tuning in is looking for help for their child between the ages of infancy and 3 years old, North Carolina has an infant toddler program that is not very well known, but it is a part of the Division of Public Health. And this provides services for children from age birth to 3, and it can provide service coordination and helping to kind of act as that almost like a project manager to help parents and help families. It can provide physical, occupational, speech language therapies, family support in different ways, specialized instruction, some testing out of assistive technology, figuring out what works best for your child. And the evaluation and the service coordination are free. The other services, like the therapies and some of the specialized instruction, is offered on a sliding fee scale. And any family that's deemed unable to pay cannot be turned away. Medicaid can be billed for services, and as well as other private insurance with your family's permission. And another wonderful thing like about this program is that a lot of the services are provided in a natural environment, meaning that instead of taking your 2-year-old to an office and having them sit in a waiting room before receiving speech therapy, many times they will have service providers meet your child in a more more friendly settings. So maybe they meet at the park and they help your child interact with other kids at the park. Or, if they're doing physical therapy, maybe you meet, at a local playground that has different types of equipment. That way that it is really, them providing those services in a way that feels a little more comfortable for your little one and a little more comfortable for you, and also is ultimately helping them to interact in those everyday type of environments. I've also included the contact information for Mecklenburg County specifically. So if you live in Mecklenburg County, Lisa Cloninger is your contact. And they do have a wonderfully accessible website. It's at beearly.nc.gov that kind of outlines the program and what they provide. If your child is beyond the age of 3 and starting in a school environment, and you're starting to, worry, one of the first things that I suggest is looking for patterns and writing that down. So if your child is struggling with following directions in the mornings, or if your child is having trouble reading in the afternoons, or if they're having trouble with certain types of math problems, looking for those patterns is really, really helpful. And that's an area where parents themselves often have the most insight. Whereas, in a larger classroom setting, those smaller patterns may be harder for the teacher to track. But they're really, really important to figuring out the best way to help your child. The other first step is to discuss this with the teacher and just say, look, like I've noticed these patterns, or I've noticed that, they're having really trouble with multi-step multiplication, or we're really struggling with, getting them to, want to read. And I'm wondering if there's, something going on there. The teachers are there to support your child. And many times a parent initiating that conversation with the teacher makes that teacher feel more comfortable in sharing what patterns they might have noticed, or it helps that teacher become more aware in the overall classroom setting of like, okay, there's the parents seeing this at home, and then they're going to start monitoring that aspect a little more closely themselves. The other step is to talk to your child's pediatrician. The pediatricians often have a whole list of services and places that they often refer to and recommend, and they'll be able to see if anything could potentially be linked to maybe a medication that your child is taking, or anything, physically that's going on with your child. The pediatrician will be a wonderful, partner in this process as well. So, what is the IEP? So, the IEP stands for Individualized Education Program or Plan, and it is a legal document that is protected by law. It's protected under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also shortened to the acronym IDEA. And that law is meant to ensure that all children with disabilities have access to another acronym, FAPE, which stands for Free Access to Appropriate Education. IEPs are part of the public education system and some charter schools. Private schools do not necessarily have to uphold the specific IEP, but many provide the accommodations to their students anyway. And some private schools even go beyond what would be put in an IEP to further individualize for students. It depends on the school. The IEP can provide 4 basic like buckets of things for a child. The first thing an IEP can provide is some specialized instruction where maybe your child needs to have like a smaller group for reading, or maybe they're given some, one-on-one time to work on a specific skill. It can also provide accommodations. These are things like extra testing, when extra time taking a standardized test, or maybe even having a read aloud option on a standardized test, or a seating arrangement where maybe your child needs to be in a place that isn't as distracting. Like maybe they don't do well sitting right by the window. Maybe they need to be closer to where the teacher is most of the time. And those are some accommodations that can be provided for in the IEP. It can also provide related services, such as speech language services, some occupational therapies sometimes, rarely physical therapy, but sometimes I've seen it. And it can also provide use of assistive technology. As students get older, this can be even more critical, where I've seen many older students towards the middle school and high school years really needing to have the accommodation of being able to type some of their work, especially lengthier writing assignments. And an IEP can provide an accommodation like that, where a student may be able to type some more of their work as opposed to using pencil and paper. So when you start noticing those patterns after you've discussed with your child's teacher, after you've discussed with your pediatrician, if you keep, noticing those patterns, you talk to the teacher and they're like, yeah, I kind of see some of these things happening in the classroom. And your pediatrician has kind of, ruled out any other variables there. The first thing you want to do is in writing, and I'll say it again, in writing, you want to notify the school. Unfortunately, you just talking to the teacher is not starting the process. You just talking to the exceptional children EC department that handles IEPs, that's not necessarily starting the process. It has to be in writing for it to be starting the clock is what they call it. And when you put it in writing, you really want to list some of those reasons why you think that your child is in need of some extra academic support. So this is where those notes from, finding some of those patterns at home really comes in handy. And if you can attach some samples of schoolwork, if you think your child's having trouble with, physically handwriting things, then, a writing sample would really be helpful there for them to see what you're talking about. Any sort of testing results that you have would be also something to include. You're kind of like building your case a little bit there in writing, and any sort of observations. If you have an email from a teacher that, is explaining, observing your child having difficulty, interacting with students in a positive way on the playground, or observing your child, getting teary over a specific type of instruction or a specific class, even those types of observations really do help to get the ball rolling as well. Towards the end of the presentation, I also have some other resources that I will list, and one of them does have a template for this initial written letter to start the 90-day timeline. So if you're interested in that, that can be really helpful to guide you in what to put in the process into the letter when you're sending it to the school. So once you make that written notification, then that starts a 90-day timeline. So the school has 90 calendar days to act on the referral. And that is 90 calendar days, not 90 school days. So all of those days count. And in those 90 days, they will need to evaluate your child, evaluate the student. They will need to hold an IEP meeting to determine if your child is deemed eligible for an IEP. And if the child is eligible during that 90 days, they do need to have a meeting to actually write the IEP and create the plan for your child. That timeline cannot be extended. So that's why it's really important to put it in writing. And this also can start over the summer as well. So they do have that 90 days. So this is something that I think a lot of parents aren't aware of. But if you're switching schools or moving, things like that, or you've had an IEP that has lapsed, you want to make sure that you're kind of timing it so that way your child can have those IEP accommodations and services when they're going to need them. So the earlier you can get the ball rolling on the process, the more likelihood you have of your child having, those IEP accommodations during the school year. So the next step in the process after the written notification is if your school approves the request for evaluation, they will evaluate your child, and that can be some sort of, they usually do some sort of auditory testing, some hearing testing, vision testing. They can give some academic performance assessments and some behavior rating scales if they're thinking that maybe like attention or anxiety might be impacting a child's school performance. And those evaluations can be kind of lengthy. So again, the earlier you start this process, the better for your child. And then if they deny your request, which does happen, this is where you really want to consider gathering some more evidence to make another written request, almost as if you're like appealing the denial for evaluation. Or it may be time to consider a 504 plan. Or your other option is to potentially pay for private educational assessment. The school, if you pay for outside assessment, the school must consider those results for IEP eligibility. It can be pricey, but it is still protected under IDEA, and those results still have to be taken into account. So, sorry, I keep seeing us instead of the slide. Oh, let me just move this. Sorry, gotta back it up. Okay. So when after the evaluation and input from you, input from your child's teachers, the IEP team will determine if your child is eligible for an IEP. They have to fall into one of 13 different categories, and the barrier or hindrance has to affect your child's education. So this can be tricky for students that are labeled as twice exceptional, where maybe they're having, like really like rocking out those reading tests, but then maybe struggling in math. Or this can be tricky for students that are, kind of borderline, where their test results are, okay, but they're not reaching their full potential. And that they are not performing where they're capable of performing regularly. It has to be affecting their education. So it has to be you have to really try to be able to prove that it is something that they need the assistance for. Some categories that will be included would be a specific learning disability, a speech and language impairment, or students can qualify under another acronym, which is OHI, which is other health impaired. And that could be things like ADHD or generalized anxiety disorder, or a whole other slew of health concerns that could determine a child's eligibility for the IEP. If your child is deemed ineligible for an IEP, do not stop and give up. You have other options. You can pay for an individual educational evaluation. You can ask the school to pay for an individual educational evaluation at an outside service. You can ask for a 504 plan. You can file a formal due process complaint. And you can seek the guidance or assistance from an educational consultant, or sometimes these are also called education advocates, who are well versed in the process and who can really stand up for your child's rights and make sure that your child is getting the services that they are deserving of. So some big difference between the IEP and the 504. So the IEP can provide specialized education services that are tailored to your child's needs, which can look more like some small group instruction or even some one-on-one instruction. It could even be, related therapies. Whereas the 504 is less structured than an IEP. So if your child qualifies for the IEP, and you really want to go that route, it is more regulated and effective. But the 504 is kind of like an IEP light, if you will. It is still federally protected and protected by law. The teachers do have to enforce whatever is put into the 504 plan. But 504 typically covers just the more accommodations. So again, the accommodations would be more like if a child needs special seating, or if a child needs extended time on a test, or maybe even the accommodation of having another student provide notes for a class. Those are things that can be provided for in an IEP or a 504. The IEP can also include related services and therapies, and it is reviewed by a team every year. And then students have to be reevaluated by the school every 3 years. The IEP, once it is put into place, it cannot be used on an as-needed basis. So once an IEP is in place, everyone has to follow it until it is determined that a child has met all of those goals, and then they will either add more goals to it, or as parents or legal guardians, you can decide if you no longer want your child to receive the services that are indicated on the IEP. But once it is in place, it is hard to get rid of, and it's not easy to take it away per se. Now, the 504 students do have to be diagnosed with a physical or emotional disability or impairment. But the 504 has more flexibility. It can be used as needed or temporarily. For instance, if a child is needing to be out of school for to recover from a surgery, a 504 can be put into place to give that student some more accommodations during that process, and during that time frame. And a 504 can also be used to give students frequent breaks in the classroom, so the use of sensory fidgets, and some modification of assignments, such as homework assignments. If students need modification of a large amount of the curriculum in class, then it has to be through an IEP. The 504 can only handle, only covers some smaller modifications to assignments. Okay. 504 is also provided through the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or that IDEA. It's enforced by the Office of Civil Rights, and it prohibits that any entity that receives federal financial assistance from discriminating against persons with disabilities. So school districts are required to provide each student with a disability any special education, any sort of related aids or services to make sure that that student is able to receive a free, appropriate public education. This can include things like physical therapy and speech therapy. And it can be modifying the regular education program so that that child can be successful with that curriculum. Again, additional time to take tests, lenience on absences for medical reasons. There's a slew of things that the 504 plan can cover. So this is a good backup if your child does not fully qualify for an IEP. But you really, most of the time you want to try for the IEP first. Some components that can be put in place in the IEP are the student's present levels of classroom performance, a statement of goals, related services, the student's special education needs, any sort of modifications or changes. So maybe a student needs to be given two lines of a worksheet at a time instead of the whole worksheet. Or maybe the student needs more simplistic math problems than other students in the class. IEP will also list out any accommodations that can be helpful for that student, and then the teachers must follow those accommodations in the IEPs. If you find that a teacher is not providing those accommodations, for example, if your child is given the accommodation that they are allowed to use graph paper to line up their math problems, and the teacher is not providing graph paper to your child, the first step would be to mention that to the teacher, and also give that teacher the opportunity to rectify the situation. But if it continues, you do need to contact the IEP team and the Exceptional Children's Department at your child's school to let them know that the accommodations are not being provided to your child, because again, they are legally provided to your child and need to be upheld. So please do speak up if you notice that it's not being provided to your child. There's also in an IEP a statement of least restrictive environment, or another acronym, LRE. And that is really just saying that the IEP team is really going to determine what is the best environment that your child can be successful in that has the least amount of restrictions. So if your child can be successful inside of the regular education classroom setting, just with some support from a special education teacher, they would list that as the least restrictive environment, and they can have that special education teacher push into the classroom and just kind of be the students kind of perceive that teacher as like a co-teacher, and provide that support to your child and other children in the class. The IEP will also list any sort of testing placement, and also provides a statement of transition once a child reaches age 14. And that's really like starting to think about that child's future beyond the high school years, and creating accommodations and support for what does this child need to be successful beyond high school, and how are we going to prepare them for what happens after graduation. So, after I've just been, talking at you for a while, I'm sure that you probably have a slew of more questions because this is such a in-depth, complex process. Hopefully, I've been able to make it a little clearer today. But if not, some of these sites are really fantastic. The Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, they provide free one-on-one support and guidance for families of children with exceptional needs. So you can schedule time to meet with someone one on one, and they can walk you through some of these steps or give you guidance on who to contact and what your child may be eligible for. The Disability Rights NC website is the website that I referred to earlier that does provide a sample IEP referral letter, and is also just a website with a great amount of resources on accommodations that can be provided, and a wonderful way to learn about the rights that are afforded to children under IDEA. I'm also open to you emailing me, and I will make the promise to you that I may not know all of the answers, but I definitely can point you to someone who does know the answer. So feel free to reach out to me as well. And again, your child's teacher or pediatrician are also incredibly valuable resources on your team to be able to help you figure out how to help your child. And another powerful tool is learning from other parents. There are some really amazing, really vibrant and strong parent groups, especially through Facebook, in our local area, that are fantastic ways to connect with other parents who are going through the journey as well, and can provide you with some emotional support, but also some knowledge. And it really helps to know that you're not alone and that this is overwhelming for everyone. And it really is a wonderful way to kind of, put more heads together on a way to help your child, and get some other valuable opinions and learn from the journey of others. Um, I can't see my last one there. But just making sure that you're, reaching out, and not just saddling any sort of concerns that you. Many parents and guardians have a wonderful insight into their child and can tell when their child is struggling more than they should be. And you really want to listen to that and honor that, and do everything you can to make sure that your child is successful in their educational journey. And many times that starts sooner rather than later, but at any point, it's helpful to know that all of these resources and assistance are available to you and to your child.